Voting in KwaZulu-Natal has been progressing slowly. Earlier today, just 5% of the 77,000 people who registered for special votes had voted so far. In comparison, 55% of the province's home visits have been concluded. Over 167,000 people are registered for special votes in the province. For an update on the situation in the province, we now joined by our reporter Ayanda Mhlongo at the IEC's Operations Centre in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. Good afternoon to you, Ayanda. But before we perhaps talk about what the update is there on the ground, you're obviously in the the provincial rock in Durban, in KZN. Talk to me about just the security issues that the IEC has raised. We know that Police Minister Bekicele is in the province, monitoring the situation on the ground.
Yeah, very good afternoon to you, Nat, and good afternoon to the viewers at home. Certainly, security and the safety of voters and the safety of electoral staff is of paramount importance to the IEC officials here at the Rock, and this is a matter that the officials of the IEC here in the province of KwaZulu-Natal were not going to compromise on. Of course, Nat, you would know that there were the issues that took place yesterday, namely in the Mkambatini municipality, where, as you said, the Minister of Police was currently visiting that area, and also in the Mdoni municipality in the area of Mistake Farm, where there were those protests which led to the disruption of voting in those areas. And in terms of the IEC and the plan that they had received from security agencies, the voting stations had been categorized high risk to a medium risk voting stations. There were 119 high risk stations, and in these stations, the assurance from the security agencies was that there were going to be no less than 6 police officers that were going to be deployed to those voting stations. 815 voting stations were categorized as a medium risk, meaning that no less than 4 police officers were going to be deployed to those voting stations. Of course, there are additional police reinforcements that were on standby to respond to any area where there were issues. And these areas that we've seen these disruptions, Unati, over yesterday in Mkambatini, in the Mdoni municipality, were not areas that had been previously identified as hotspots. And so this goes to show, and what the IEC is saying, that they had to ensure that they prepared, they had to ensure that there were additional police officers that were going to be on standby, so that they were going to respond to areas like this, which they had not planned for. But certainly, IEC officials saying that, and particularly this morning with the start of a second day of the voting of the special votes, the 8 voting stations in Mkambatini did open, but they still had challenges in the area of Mdoni, where in one of the voting stations they still needed to conduct 36 home visits, and the IEC was not going to go ahead with those home visits until the police had been deployed to that area. So voting, they started a little bit later, while the IEC officials on the ground, they were waiting for the police, and that just shows the IEC saying that, as I've said, they're not going to compromise on security, and they were not going to allow their officials to go out into the areas, nor were they going to allow them to enter the voting stations in areas which were not safe for them. Onati?
Component in terms of, security issues there in KZN, but what else did the IEC have to say? I know that when I spoke to them yesterday, they were very pleased, in terms of how day one went, in terms of the special votes. But how has it been? Today's the second day. We know that it's been fairly quiet across the country. How do you think that it went in KZN, or what has the IEC reported on in terms of just the turnout, from these 2 days?
Yeah, well, as you're saying, Unati, in your introduction, that voting started off a bit slow, particularly if you look at the numbers of people that were expected to cast their ballots at the voting stations. There were over 94,000 applications that had been made for people to cast their vote in the voting stations, and over 77,000 were of those people that were going to go to the voting stations, and 94,000 were going to be the home visits. Yesterday, despite the challenges and the weather conditions in some area, the IEC was able to get to over 55% of the home visits, but they were concerned about the numbers of people that were going through to cast their vote at the voting stations. By 11 o'clock, the IEC reporting that only 5% of voters had gone through to the voting stations, but by 3 p.m. this afternoon, that number had increased to about 61%. Unati. This is of the 77,000 applications that they have received. We were still waiting now for the latest figures in terms of how many people have gone through to the voting stations, but they were pleased with the home visits. In fact, here in the eThekwini municipality, which of course had the highest number of applications for special votes, all the home visits had been concluded and administered here in the eThekwini Metro. Of course, in the rural areas, they were going to expect delays there due to the terrain and the difficulty that was going to be experienced by the IEC officials to try and get to those homes. Another problem, of course, was connectivity in some areas. The IEC had challenges in terms of getting to the areas that they needed to get to administer those votes, but also then to get that information here to the nerve center here in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. So there was going to be those delays there. But apart from that, the IEC saying that the second day went off or started off with very few glitches. As I said, in terms of security as well, today a number of police officers have been deployed across the province of KwaZulu-Natal. More voting stations open. We have 4,940 voting stations in KZN Unati, and today a much better day in terms of the IEC. But tomorrow they will be giving an update on the process of today and what the numbers were for how many people of the 167,000 people who had registered to cast this vote during the past 2 days, how many people would have come through. So a bit slow on those coming through to the voting stations, but they've seemingly done well when it comes to the home visits. So Nati?
Ayanda, perhaps before I let you go, how's the morale, how's the mood in the IEC Centre? I mean, of course, this is not the 1st of November yet. We already anticipated that fewer people would come out to the polls on these two special, voting days. But talk to me about just how everyone is doing. Are they confident that, elections will go smoothly by tomorrow?
Well, for IEC officials, they have done all that they can. All their systems are in place. It is at the Rock, of course, it is still pretty quiet. Unati, we're expecting the number of people to grow by tomorrow, and especially on Tuesday, it's going to be a buzz of activity here at the Rock. And I must say that also while we are here in the main hall, Unati, this time around, due to COVID-19 and social distancing and the protocols, the political parties, which in previous elections they would be here with us in the main hall, they are not stationed or catered for here in the main hall. They're actually in a venue adjacent to where we are. And we went there as well just to speak to the political parties, the 16 political parties that have qualified to actually have a presence here at the Rock. They are not here yet. We are expecting the leaders or those representative of the political parties to come here from tomorrow evening. Some have told us that they will be here tomorrow evenings as they await the results as they start to trickle in. But of course, I suppose in a province like KwaZulu-Natal, Nati, with all these issues that come up, yesterday, we spoke about the delays of delivery of PPEs in some of the districts, and then the security concerns. The IEC officials, of course, would be on edge, but relatively they're saying that these are problems that they're used to. Many of the IEC officials that we've been working with have been part of the IEC since 1994, and so they know and understand the challenges that come with holding such an election. And even though in KwaZulu-Natal we've seen an increase in the number of political parties that are campaigning and the number of registered voters, making the work of the IEC, of course, a lot more than we'd seen in the past years. But they're saying they're up to the task. And, everybody is now waiting for tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, is going to be the big day. They've had these 2 days as a dry run, and so they've been able to see where the problem areas are. We also know that there were other issues around infrastructure, where there was no water, electricity, proper sanitation in some of those voting stations, but all the necessary material has been sent to those voting stations. Provisions have been made for the voters as well as the IEC staff in those voting stations. Onati?
Ayanda, thank you so much for that very comprehensive update. Ayanda Mhlongo at the IEC, The Rock in Durban, coming to us live there. Thank you so much for your time. All right, let's